Hello, everyone. Welcome to Random Encounter 253 or 253. My name is Jono Logan, and welcome back, because we were off last week, but you got an episode of Rhythm Encounter to tide you over. I don't know if you listened to it. If you aren't listening to Rhythm Encounter, I highly recommend giving it a shot, because it's a great, great show, and you hear some really, really great video game music there. But we're back on track now. We're back on schedule, so it's going to be the same us, rhythm, us, rhythm, us, rhythm every Monday. Okay, so this week we're going to do something a little bit different. I don't know if I've mentioned it here before, but I am a fan of the video game series Yakuza. The very first time I played this game was back in 2019 with Yakuza Kiwame, which is a game that was assigned to me by Alana. And it's not a game that I ever would have taken by myself. I think it was like my second review I ever wrote for the site. And I just needed to write something. And Alana was like, just go into the codes received pile. I don't think anyone's covering Yakuza because we already have a review for it if you want to do that. So I said, what the heck? And if she hadn't said that, I would have probably missed out on this incredible series. Now, it's become incredibly popular over the last few years since the release of Yakuza 0 back in 2017 helped push it into the mainstream. And since then, I think it's only been gaining steam. The Yakuza series has recently been rebranded into the Like a Dragon series, which was the original title in Japan. But as the vast majority of the games in the series are still called Yakuza, absent a significant rebranding effort, we're just going to keep referring to it as Yakuza for this episode. So I would argue the biggest problem with the Yakuza series is that there are a ton of entries. There are currently 8 mainline games, 8 spin-offs. There's even a spin-off series called Judgment. And if you ever wanted to get into the series, that number, it's a daunting challenge. You look at it and you're like, wow, this is dense. How do I get in? And that's why RPG Fan is here. And that's why we have a brand new entry in our So You Want to Get Into series of features. This is just like our other features, like that we did one for Tales, we did one for Trails, we did one for Fire Emblem, a whole bunch more. All of them will be linked in the show notes. So the purpose of these features is to give you, the reader, a comprehensive overview of the series, a breakdown of the games, and include some recommendations of where to get started. So this is So You Want to Get Into the Yakuza series. And I was one of the writers on this feature. I was definitely not the only writer on this feature because this is an absolute beast. It was a big, big feature. It took us a long time to write. So my co-writer is joining me on this episode, Giancarlo Vazquez, who is also known as GC online. Hey, how you doing, GC?
I'm doing good. Hello. That was a fantastic introduction, may I just say.
Thank you very much. I wish I could say it was off the top of my head, but I have it all right in front of me. Funny enough, when you joined RPG Fan as a feature writer about two and a half years ago, I think.
My God, it's already been 2.5 years.
It's been a while. It did not click with me for quite some time that I was already subscribed to your YouTube channel and had watched all of your Dragon Quest series.
I had no idea that anyone at RPG Fan knew what I was up to. So it was very funny to find out that you had watched my videos before. I think, did you know when I had jumped in, or I think it was I think you've told me this before. I think when we were working on the feature together, you were like, wait a minute.
Yeah, that was it. We had a card in Trello, which is how we organize our features and things like that. And we were going back and forth, and I created the So You Want to Get Into the Yakuza series, and I was going to write it. And then I looked at it and I was like, okay, I don't have time to write this right now because I have review management. I'm doing the show. I just did not have time. And you chimed in with I would love to work on this. And I was like, this guy has the same last name as and GC, Yeah, and then I rewatched your stuff and was like, oh yeah, okay, same person. That's cool.
Yeah.
I mean, what are the odds that there'd be 2 people with your name who also like Yakuza?
And then you asked me to help, and then maybe I want to say secretly I said, yeah, I'll do some things, and then secretly I think that night I was just scribbling into a notebook, and then we can do this, and then we can write this, and then this could be here, and we can do this over here. When you asked me, hey, do you want to help? I said, yeah, of course. And then in my room, I went, finally! And I scribbled and scribbled and scribbled a ton of stuff.
Okay, I just want to say, I said, you're my co-writer. That's not accurate at all. I was your co-writer.
That's not true. It was an equal effort.
We both contributed our own thing, and it was really cool to write because we both have our own styles of writing, and like merging that and finding the balance between us was an interesting experience, and it was a lot of fun.
It actually reads really well because of that. I think I was like skimming through it. I wasn't going to read it because I've read
We wrote it.
We wrote it, and I must have read it so many times, like just making sure everything was whatever, and then like reviewing all the changes we were making.
Mm-hmm.
And then I was skimming through it, like the once it got published, and I remember telling myself, man, this flows so nicely between like my writing and Jono's, and I was like, ooh, I was really, really pleased with how it turned out. I think we nailed it. I mean, that's a little, I don't mean to toot our own horns here, but
no, I think we're proud of this, and I think it's pretty justifiably so. I'm really happy with the way this turned out.
Mm-hmm.
We got to put in our own specific stupid jokes. Like my stupid joke for the entire thing was I wrote all of the. I think when I wrote the review for the Yakuza remastered collection, and we did a video for it on YouTube. And just as a joke for my own amusement, I did this whole thing where I recapped every part of it with the Tojo clan is in crisis, and like did this like over the top, almost like Star Wars-esque crawl at the beginning of each one of the
it
video
reads
reviews.
Like a title crawl.
Yeah, exactly. So and then I decided to I think I could probably do this. So I kept doing it for every Yakuza game that I reviewed. And then when we started doing this, I was like, screw it. And I just wrote like little brief summaries using that template for every game in the series. And I amused myself.
It came out terrific. It's such a nice, like, little identifying aspect of the writing. I love it. I think that feature was so much fun to write, in part because both of us kind of have a similar experience with the series, where we haven't really like grown up with it per se. Like we didn't like start playing it when it was in circulation and coming out. We kind of caught up to it, so to speak.
Well, let me ask you that. Let's start there. What first got you into the Yakuza series?
I watched the Let's Play. I watched the Yakuza 4 Let's Play, and I was sitting there kind of bored, and I said, I guess I'll just watch whatever they're playing. And it opens up with Akiyama, and it has like this really long, dramatic opening cutscene of stuff happening, and like this really big tension between these gangs. And I was like, man, this cutscene's going on for a long time. And I was like, you know what? It's a PS3 era. That makes a lot of sense. And then it just dumps you into this sandbox or open world, however you want to refer to it as. And I said, well, okay, there's going to be some side quests and a main thing. I was kind of expecting the usual open world fare. And then they walked into a Sega arcade and played Sega games for I don't know how long. And I went, wait, what? And then they went to the batting cages, and I went, wait, what? And every like 10 minutes, there was just some other mini game or some other play spot or some other wacky thing. And then they finally get to a side quest, and the side quest is so bonkers and so weird and strange that I said to myself, I got to play all of this. I need to play all of this. On top of the fact that it had a pretty solid and very interesting combat system focused on like style. Like just visually, it just grabbed me just watching a Let's Play of it.
I understand where you're coming from. Also, I'm genuinely trying to think about what it would be like to approach Yakuza 4 without any context and get dumped into Akiyama's story. That would be that's diving right into the deep end.
Yeah.
Although you know what, 4 is a perfect. I would argue that if you didn't want to get started with, like, I guess Yakuza Kiwami didn't even exist yet. So if you didn't want to get started with Yakuza 1 for the PS2, that Yakuza 4 was probably like one of the best entry points for the series, because you had the introduction of these 3 new main characters.
Yeah, I would agree because it doesn't even start with the titular character.
I don't think it should be in the game personally, but that's where I'm coming from.
I'm also of the mind where I do enjoy Kiryu's presence in 4 and 5, especially 5. 5 makes more sense, but in 4, if he weren't in there, I would also be totally fine with it.
Like when I played 4, I was totally fine with Kiryu showing up in cutscenes and like kind of as a guiding, passing the torch on to these new protagonists. But when he comes into his own again and in like the last chapter, I remember that happened and I was like, dude, what are you doing? This isn't your story.
Yeah, he kind of steals the show at the very end.
Yeah, he just kind of shows up and it's like, you have nothing to do with any of this. And I think my favorite part is when he fights Akiyama and what's the Tanimura in the sewers, and after the cutscene they're like, who is that guy? And I'm like, yeah, who was that guy? Where the hell did he come from?
It would have been so much better if not better, like it would have been so much more fitting to the series if he hadn't been in the game at all, and he just kind of ends up being an incidental fight because Akiyama and Tanimura together just seem like dudes up to no good. And it would have been so much funnier if just for like a brief moment you get to play as him, but he had nothing to do with the story. He was like, I'm going to go get milk. And he ends up fighting everybody on the way there. And it would have been such a nice, because it's sort of like the running joke or the running gag with any protagonist of a Yakuza series where everyone wants to fight them.
Or you know what would even be better than that? If just while you're playing the game as like these various characters, at random points you just see him like on the side of a road, like doing weird things, like he has a sandwich board on and he's like handing out flyers for someone. You're like, oh, he got roped into a side quest. It's a sub story, and it's just like completely out of context Kiryu just doing random sub stories just on the streets of Kamurocho.
See, now you say that, and now I really want there to be a Yakuza game / Like a Dragon game where that is exactly what's happening to one of the characters we recognize and have played as before. I don't really care who it is. You know who would be great for that? Shinada. If you bring back Shinada from 5, and he's just like, every time you see him, he's just a model in the environment, and he's doing some sort of zany side quest that has nothing to do with anything.
Yep. Or just like Onomichi shows up and you're just like, that's probably Kiryu.
Oh, he's working some part-time jobs right now.
Anyway, okay, well, let's go through the feature a little bit. So
Sure.
We opened it up with describing Yakuza to people who have never played it before. And that's a more challenging thing to do than most would expect, because these games are genre-defying in many of the best ways. Traditionally, for years and years, people referred to it as the Japanese Grand Theft Auto, which is insane, because the games couldn't be further apart in terms of style, tone, gameplay, anything.
It is a victim. The Yakuza series is a victim of marketing at the time, and it's kind of embarrassing when you look into it, because you kind of learn that Nagoshi blatantly made Yakuza as a counterpiece to Grand Theft Auto, where he played Grand Theft Auto, or he saw Grand Theft Auto, and he said, I can do that kind of story, and I can do it without being that needlessly violent, which is very funny when you play Yakuza. But if you really compare the two, he has a point.
Well, violence with consequences is what Yakuza is, really. Like, there's gang violence and things like that, because obviously it's about the Yakuza. But like, there are no points where Kiryu could ever run down a pedestrian and get away with it scot-free.
No, everything has huge consequence, and at times, to the point, Kiryu is often the consequence to other people enacting violence. So it's a nice little like to call that a GTA clone. Number one is I think kind of shooting yourself in the foot if you're trying to sell the game, because you're going to get a lot of returns that way. But two, it's kind of it's not an insult, but it's kind of ignorant of what that game is supposed to be.
Yeah, especially the very first one. Like, well, let's talk about some of the games. So obviously, for a lot of people, including myself, I've never played the original Yakuza for PlayStation 2. I completely missed it. It was not on my radar. I did not play it at all. My first exposure was Yakuza Kiwame, which is the same story, just with the modern bells and whistles of the series, and a few little things in there to fill in a few plot holes. You and I think, have slightly different opinions about Kiwame.
I think so.
But the original Yakuza, if we're going back to this GTA thing, like it's nothing like GTA. GTA was an open world, whereas the original Yakuza is a walled garden type thing. You're
Yeah.
you're in this neighborhood, and it also did not have like over the shoulder free roaming. Like it had, when you'd go off screen, it would cut to a different camera angle.
Yeah, it was an isometric action RPG.
Yeah, I would argue it had more in. I would argue that it had more in common with like Streets of Rage than with like
Absolutely.
GTA. It was a beat 'em up. It was a modern interpretation of a beat 'em up with a much more engaging story.
Yeah, the prototype for the combat system in Yakuza is actually an arcade game that Nagoshi helped develop. That was just a 3D beat 'em up.
Yeah,
I played a little bit of it for research, and it's all right. It's a quarter muncher, but what arcade game isn't?
Well, the original game was released here, and it had some interesting localization drama involved with it, shall we say. Every game since, up until the very recent ones, have always been in Japanese only with Japanese subtitles, but the original one had a full English voiceover, and it is infamous.
It is full of excessive swearing. It has a star-studded cast for the time that it was made in, and some of that cast doesn't remember they were in it.
Oh, yeah, I totally believe that.
And there's also the other thing is the naming. People's names were confused. Like just honorifics are kind of thrown around willy-nilly sometimes. It was a very clumsy first outing. That being said, I got to give credit to the person who kind of led that localization, because there wasn't much to go off of back. Like localization was a lot harder back then.
And I also feel like they would have gotten the note continuously from that the game needs to be more extreme.
Yeah, like because if they were marketing it as a GTA clone, that was probably part of that group's job, was to localize it in a way that would make it appealing to GTA fans.
Yeah, and I don't know if they were successful in that. But
no. There's a ton of reviews online from back in the day of people going, "This is nothing like GTA. Why do they tell me these things? What the heck? I don't like this at all. I'm returning it."
I would argue that in terms of the original, from what I have seen on YouTube, the thing that most people nowadays would go, "Hey," would be Mark Hamill as Majima, which is pretty damn good casting.
It is fantastic casting. I wish he remembered he did it.
I think that my favorite thing about that casting actually is when I first heard that Mark Hamill was Majima, my first thought is, oh, he's just playing the Joker. And then I heard the performance, and it's not the Joker. It's like, it turns out Mark Hamill is a very good actor.
Yeah, there's a nuance to it.
Extraordinarily good voice actor, as a matter of fact.
Yeah, it's not a flat out Joker impression. It's not just him doing the Joker. He's got like this kind of like slouch in his voice when he does it. So it's like the Joker if the Joker was more of like a surfer dude almost. Where he's like, man, what I do to have a girl like that? And he's just kind of like, he's kind of nonchalant. It's kind of nice.
It's an interesting interpretation of Majima.
Yeah. One that became iconic.
And that is actually a problem with Yakuza Kiwame, which is Majima's portrayal in Yakuza and Yakuza Kiwame is a very different character from the character that we get to know in later games. Let's talk a bit about the entry point here. So arguably, if you're going into the original series of games, so all the ones starring Kiryu, you have 2 entry points that would be recommended to you, which would be, I guess, 3 technically. So you could do Yakuza, which is a little difficult nowadays, I would argue. There's a localization.
Your mileage may vary.
Mileage may vary. I know it's a little clunky because it was a PS2 game and it's the first game in the series.
It's an early PS2 game, I think, as well.
Yep. There is Yakuza Kiwame, which is the updated version of it, with more modern graphics using the Yakuza 5 and 0 engine. And then there is, which arguably is the most popular game in the series, Yakuza 0. which is a prequel that takes place in the late 80s. Where would you recommend that they come in?
It really depends on what you're looking for. Like we were talking about.
Oh yeah, you and I had I'm going to say argument. We didn't have a fight. It was a discussion about what we think the best entry point is.
So I've done some thinking about it, and I still would recommend. I still would recommend if you don't want to go back to the PS2 era, to sort of start from release date, I guess. I would still recommend Yakuza 0. And the reason I would do that is because, well, I've actually kind of warmed up on Kiwami being the entry point, if only because there is an appeal to sort of playing through Kiwami, seeing Majima close to what he was originally sort of written as, and then going back to 0 and sort of seeing essentially seeing the entire series build up into alluding into who he actually is and what kind of a person he actually is and how he comes to be the way that he is in the first game. Like getting that experience right after, like from that point onward in 2, 3, 4, and 5, you kind of get to see the dots connect. So there is somewhat of an interest. And I think you were actually the person that told me this, Jono, where it was like you get to see the end and the beginning of the Majima character from going from Kiwami to 0, and then 2, 3, 4, and 5 is watching the dots connect the two and sort of complete the picture for you, where you have one side and the other. That being said, like PS2 Yakuza 1 is kind of a trip because they never expected Majima to be a character that they kept around for a long time. So Majima in 1 is a very different character from Majima in Kiwami, which I think is what you were alluding to with the question, where it's like, what do you prefer? Do you want to see a version? It's the same game, it's the same story, but do you want to see the additions in Kiwami that take into account everything that they've done for the character up till now, or do you want to see the original version and sort of watch in a meta narrative sense, watch as they like retcon and massage away some of the rougher details that make him like not as appealing as a character to sort of like attach yourself to. Sort of they dull the edges around Majima as time goes on to make him more appealing. And I think witnessing him in the first 2 PS2 games is sort of a really nice like vacuum of a weird iconic character, and it's what made him important to the series. So it really comes down to that. Ironically, it's not Kiryu that I would make that decision on. I would actually base entirely where you start on Yakuza on what kind of Majima do you want to begin with.
We talked about this, and I think that the main problem with Kiwami, looking at it through the lens of Majima, is that there are 2 different characters named Majima in Yakuza Kiwami. There's Majima, the character that came out of Yakuza 0, which is the Majima Everywhere character, who you're constantly running into on the street, who wants to teach Kiryu how to gain his edge again, who goes to like the club, and you can have a hostess date with him. There's that Majima, and then there's the other Majima who kidnaps and who is deliberately putting Kiryu and other in danger. And they're 2 very different characters, and it's very difficult to reconcile the 2 in that game.
Yeah, it's almost like if you don't have context for it, you half expect there to be a reveal that he's 2 different people.
Yeah, or
because he kind of is 2 different people.
Yeah, he's 2 different characters. He's the character from Yakuza the original, and he's the character from Yakuza 0. And that was one of the big things that was put into Yakuza Kiwami, which is this entire separate mode, Majima Everywhere, where Majima can ambush Kiryu to help him get his edge back. And
it is a continuation of the Mr. Beatdown mechanic from 0, but in a different package, which I appreciated a lot.
Yes. And I mean, that entire section is extremely enjoyable up to the point where you technically complete it, and then he keeps showing up. At that point, you're like, oh god, just
at that point, yeah, I'm like, you should just not show up as this encounter anymore, because I can only tiger drop you so many times, Majima. I've mastered the tiger drop thanks to Majima, but now he won't stop attacking me, and now I don't want to do the tiger drop anymore.
Yep. I know where you're coming from. I think in the feature, we at one point we kind of say that Yakuza Kiwame could almost be better absorbed as a piece of DLC from Yakuza 0, because it is in a lot of ways. It does have that feel to it. In my mind, your entry point can come down to one of two things. If you want the better game, and you want the better, I guess, story and overall experience, you can't go wrong with Yakuza 0. It's just an exceptional game. It's a brilliant standalone piece of Yakuza. You can jump into that without knowing anything, and you can enjoy every bit of it.
Yeah, it is not just a good Yakuza game. It is phenomenal just in general.
Yes.
of a title, and it's so worth playing.
Oh, absolutely. But, and here is where I'm coming from, if you want to get a different experience with Yakuza 0 than most people get, which is Yakuza 0 is a brilliant prequel. It's one of the best prequels I've ever played. And if you play it first, you're not going to get the joy of a brilliant prequel, which is you get to see where the characters came from. You get to see their previous relationships. You get to see the formative experiences of these characters that you've come to love. And I didn't play 0 until after I played both Kiwames. So by that point in time, I knew these characters pretty damn well. I knew them. I loved them. I saw their struggles. So when I played 0, I got this immensely emotional experience of seeing Kiryu with Nishiki and their friendship, and knowing that where that is going. So those scenes hit so much harder.
Yeah, and to piggyback off what you're saying, like, I'm glad you brought up the Nishiki point, where one thing Kiwami does really well over the original and in conjunction with 0 is sort of really round out the Nishiki character, who I'm assuming we're not going to get into spoilers.
No.
I don't know whether or not we do, but like Nishiki is the central antagonist in Yakuza 1. We know that for a fact.
It becomes obvious very soon into the game.
It becomes very obvious soon into the game. And in the original one, he's kind of a background element in a lot of ways. Like, he's not really forward facing in the story. Whereas if you play 0 and then go to Kiwami 1, again, playing it as a DLC to 0, like you say, it really rounds out the character to a point that it really achieves what I feel the original tried to set out and do and fail, which was to make sort of Kiryu and Nishiki's conflict, a much more, a very difficult, like, painful experience for the both of them. And I think that's sort of, I think that is something you miss out on in the original, and it's sort of like what makes 0 so powerful of a story, is that it better sets people up for the things that you will experience in Kiwami 1.
So the entry point here really depends on what you want to go for. If you want to play the better game, play Yakuza 0. If you want a touch of what it felt like to actually play Yakuza 0 when it first came out, maybe play both Kiwames and then go to Yakuza 0, because by then you'll know the characters. Because, like, for a lot of people, they had played Yakuza 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then there was 0, so they knew these characters extremely well. So for old school fans of the series, Yakuza 0 would have hit very differently than people who were picking it up for the very first time.
It was very cool, because I've been playing the Yakuza series since I was like, I want to say I was like just right out of college, and I'm very old now. So that was a long time ago.
He originally played Yakuza on the ColecoVision.
That's right. The Atari 2400. That's what I played it on.
So yeah, Yakuza, moving past the entry point, we have Yakuza 2, or Yakuza Kiwame 2, which is its full remake using the more modern Dragon engine. And then you have 3, 4, 5, and 6. So I would argue that 1, 2, 1, including 0. So there's 7 games in the original Kiryu story. So this is basically the
Yes.
story of one man trying to remove himself from the Yakuza, the world of Yakuza.
Yes.
And this is I would argue that you do not want to jump into any of these games without prior knowledge of where you're coming from.
It's difficult too. It's difficult to. You definitely don't want to jump in at 6.
No, you don't want to jump in at 6.
No, you don't want to jump in at 5.
Nope.
3,
because 4 maybe.
You could do 3, but 3 is a terrible representation of the series. It's not a bad game, but if 3 is your first Yakuza game, you will. I know people who played 3 first, and they found it very exhausting in the way that in 3 has a problem where, I mean, you know this, but for people that don't know, 3 has a problem where enemies really love to guard a lot, and breaking guards in Yakuza 3 for most people is really difficult because the mechanics of Yakuza at the time didn't really build itself around enemies who blocked, because it's a beat 'em up game. And beat 'em ups, enemies don't block most of the time. And so it can be a very big slog because you don't really have the tools to like deal with it. And then on top of that, I think 3 has some of the longest cutscenes.
Oh god, there's
in the series.
Yeah, 3 suffers from a massive plot dump midway through the game just to have it make sense.
I wasn't even thinking of the plot dump. I totally forgot about the plot dump.
Oh, it's just death. It stops the game dead. The problem with 3, and the problem and one of the great things about 3 is it's the prototype for the entire series moving forward. Yeah. This is the one that, we lost the camera angles and the shifting things. It's entirely from, behind your main character. It looks like the rest of the series. Everything after this used 3 as a template in terms of the perspective and the general gameplay. The first 2, from what I understand and from what I've seen, play very differently from the rest of the series. But you can play 3 and recognize it as a Yakuza as we know it today.
Yeah.
But the story and everything, it's not going to make a lot of sense.
It doesn't. You would think, oh, it's the new sort of take of, it's like the modernization of Yakuza is the first one. So maybe I'll play this one first and that'll get me accustomed to it. Not really. To make matters worse, the story even starts in media res. So if you haven't played the other ones and you jump into this, you immediately, I don't know about you, but when I play a game that starts in media res in the middle of a series, my brain goes, this is stuff from the other game.
You're going to be doubly lost.
Yeah, like is this from the other game? Is this from here? Is this from there? And then finally you realize, oh, it's just a flashback to something that happens in this story. But by then you have so many questions that go unanswered because they're not supposed to, like, you're not supposed to be asking those questions.
Yeah.
And it loses you. And also it's sort of like, it's a good thing that it's the prototype, because if you think about it that way, you can kind of say, well, it's the prototype and it's probably really rough around the edges. And you would be right. You can go ahead and take a look at Kiryu's face model for Yakuza 3 and his face model for Yakuza 4. And if you put those 2 together, you will actually see such a difference in the 2. And these are, I think Yakuza 4 was 8 months after 3. Or no, I think 3 was 8 months after 2. One of 3 had a very short development time,
which is incredible given what they did.
Yeah, it's super impressive, right?
Not only did they create an entirely new town that's a central area, they also, for the very first time, did Kamurocho in like full explorable
proper 3D.
Proper 3D.
And it's incredible. It's honestly a feat of the people that work there. I really hope they weren't put through crunch, but I know better.
No, they were definitely put through crunch.
Yeah. And like and so, but it's still very rough around the edges. The lighting is a little off. The models are a little uncanny valley. And then if you look at the jump from 3 to 4, it really stands out. And I kind of want to lead into 4 with that by saying, because we were talking about this before we started, we kind of like our conversation just kind of drifted that way, and we both kind of were like, you brought it up and you said, 4 might actually be a solid
entry
point.
Yeah.
And I agree with you on that. I genuinely agree with you on that, where
because despite Kiryu showing up in the last act, everything up to that point is pretty self-contained.
Yeah,
all these new characters.
And it all kind of, at the end, it all kind of falls in pretty well together. And then I was thinking about, I was like, well, what happens if you go from 4 to 5? And it's like, well, 5 is actually not that bad, because it takes the character you played as last in 4 and it tells a semi new story with him in 5. And that actually kind of pairs well with that's very like I'm gonna be getting made fun of. It's poetic. like it's very cool. It's like, okay, the character you played as last, that you might not have a whole lot of context for because you're coming in at the 4th game. This story that he has in this game is just all about him and the character that you met in the 4th game. That was part of his story, and it just feels like an expansion on that relationship that they have, and that's super cool. I had never thought about it that way, but it actually really works well. Like 4 and 5 work well just in a vacuum.
5 is my favorite game in the series. I love 5.
5 is phenomenal.
I just love it. I mean, 5, we were talking about prototypes earlier. 5 is very much the prototype for what they ended up doing with 0.
The postmodern Yakuza.
Yeah, they really like various fighting styles, and it's an exceptional game with so much content that it's mind-blowing. And then 5, but again, 5 is, I would never jump into 5 as an early one. And then 6, just avoid 6 at all costs. Arguably avoid 6 at all costs anyway.
It's not a good entry point, but it's also not a good ending point, and it's also not a good midway point, and it's also just not a good point.
It's a great game.
Oh, it's super fun to play.
Yeah, it's very frustrating to play because you're like, I'm having so much fun.
It feels really good to play. It feels good to bop people and trip people downstairs, and some of the context sensitivity just isn't great. But like the heat system in that game is incredible, and maybe we'll get into the combat later. But
it's arguably a little slower than you're used to, but it's still solid.
Yeah, and it's thematically appropriate. It's such a
cool town.
Yeah. Okay. Hiroshima.
Yeah, Hiroshima is a cool town.
It looks great.
But the story, I mean, it's for those who are listening to this and who want to look at the feature, GC has a series of Yakuza videos on his YouTube channel, which are linked to in the feature, which do very, very deep dives into all of these games. And the one on 6, I would argue, is particularly epic.
Thank you. I think I went a little too heavy on the voice modulation, but I stand by what I said in that video.
Yeah, I'm not saying you were courting controversy, but you were certainly doing a little dance in front of it.
I was kind of it had like I felt like it needed to be said.
I don't disagree with you. The problem with 6 is that I feel like it highlights almost every negative thing about the story and the storytelling and the tropes that are used to tell the stories of Yakuza.
Yes.
And it uses them in their worst possible way.
Would you say it is a caricature of the series, like an unfair caricature of the series? Because for me, it feels very much like that. It's all of the negative, like it's all of the things I don't like about the series packaged together in a way that's almost celebrating those things.
See, that's where I'm losing it a little bit, because as a fan of the series, and as I remember when I played the very, very first, when I played Kiwame right off the top, there's a sub story where you get picked up by a woman, and then it turns out to be a trans woman, and then her trans man brother shows up too, and Kiryu has no problem with beating the hell out of both of them.
That is an original sub-story from the first game that they kept in Kiwami 1.
It drives me crazy for 2 reasons. One, holy crap. Like, just, okay, I understand it's a product of its time, but like, Kiwame's not. 2, okay, regardless, okay, here's the problem with this, and this is not my opinion about where it's coming from. Even if you were coming from the thing for Kiryu is Kiryu never hits a woman. Ever.
Correct.
So, okay, he beats the crap out of a trans woman, so arguably he doesn't think of a trans woman as a woman, but then he also beats the crap out of a trans man. So he doesn't think that a trans man is a woman. It's just a really stupid, inconsistent thing, which doesn't make any sense. Even ignoring the gender politics of it, it's just
it is
like,
a confusing inconsistency, and it's important. And I tell people this because I get a lot of comments that say, oh well, what about this and what about that, and I say it's very important to note that it's the creators of this series who say Kiryu doesn't hit women. So when you see that sub story in the game, it's not just that, oh, Kiryu doesn't hit women, so why is he doing that? It's no, the writers believe that Kiryu doesn't hit women, and so they would never put Kiryu in a situation to hit a woman. And so when you look at it that way, you realize it's like, this is not just, oh, this is what this character believes in. This is like how the writers of this series, of this game, sort of view this specific situation. And there's an inconsistency there again, and you can tell that there's a I wouldn't say like a hateful arrogance. Like I don't want to put that into anyone's mouth, but I will say there is a misunderstanding of those people being like, there's a misunderstanding in this representation of those people, of that group of people.
Yes. And I want to use this as a springboard into, there are a lot of things in the Yakuza series which genuinely which made me go, ugh. It makes you vaguely uncomfortable because maybe the politics of it are a little bit regressive. Maybe the gender politics, the sexual, like there's something about it that just makes you go, oh, that's not.
Do you want to know like the reason why I think we play these games and we continue to play them, and at the same time we see those things and we're like, ugh. Do you want to know why? The game itself has very confusing politics. Where there are definitely a lot of standout moments in the series that are very, very, very outdated, even for its time. Very, 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 very close-minded, even for its time. But there's a lot of progressive stuff in there too. There's a lot of like surprising understanding of like the toxic masculinity of men, right? And at the same time, it still does or represents toxic masculine traits as ooh, my mouth just made a weird noise. It does, like, it also does its own, like, it also commits toxic masculine like traits into its writing or into the relationships of its characters, and not always to paint it as a bad thing. And so it's like, it's very confused. The series can be very confused about what exactly is something that should be stood up for, and what exactly is something that's actually important.
I agree, and I'm gonna be very careful with phrasing this because I don't want to sound. I have read some of the comments on some of your videos and disagree strongly with their opinion. Primarily being, what are you talking about? You're not Japanese. You don't know what you're talking about. It's a different culture. You shouldn't be imposing your own cultural values on it. Blah 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 blah. I would argue that both progressive politics and conservative politics are different in different countries around the world. They are moving at different speeds. So it's really quite amazing to play some of the Yakuza 3, for example, or Yakuza 4, and like to see very, very progressive portrayals of trans women, for example, and understanding and compassion for them. And then at the same time end up with a vaguely pro-abortion, pro-life message at the center of the 6th game. It's like, progressive politics, I think they genuinely do march forward, but they don't necessarily march forward at the same speed everywhere in the world, and different things gain acceptance faster in various places based on cultural values.
Yes.
So there are many places where Japan is more progressive than the West, and vice versa, and the same with conservatism.
Yeah. And am I allowed to shout someone out?
Yeah, please. You can shout anyone out you want.
So, I agree with you where it's like, I say this, this is my response to a lot of people when they tell me, oh, you're not Japanese, you don't know about Japanese politics, you're not, you don't have an ear to the ground over there. You don't understand what the marginalized groups there care about or what they're looking for. And you know what? To be fair to those people, they might be completely right about that. My response has always been that Japanese culture is not a monolith. Okay. The same way, like if someone were to ask you what are American politics like, you would look at them and go, like in a single word. I mean,
terrible, just terrible.
like I can't tell you, oh, everybody here believes in this one thing, because that's not true.
Like, what are you talking about? Are you talking about national politics? You're talking about regional politics?
Yeah,
are you talking about state,
are we talking
municipal?
Yeah, and also like do you want me to give you like someone goes, what does everyone think about these kind of people in America? And it's like, I couldn't tell you because we're constantly arguing about it. like it's literally not like I cannot tell you an absolute sentence. That's the same exact case with Japanese culture and Japanese politics and progressive values in Japan. But also, if you want to follow someone or hear someone talk about the Yakuza games or pretty much anything in relation to Japanese media, Kazuma Hashimoto, I hope I got his name right. There. Kazuma Hashimoto is a journalist, media critic, translator, person who he's done work for Polygon, for Silicon Era, a bunch of places. He's very big on talking about games that come out of Japan and how they represent like sort of the social commentary behind them. And he is Japanese, in case that needed to be clarified. And I basically follow him a lot, and I listen to what he has to say. So if you don't want to hear it from me because I'm not Japanese, feel free to hear from him. Like it's important to realize that these issues that we experience in our country or in our respective like world of social political norms, those get experienced elsewhere as well. We're the issues that we face here are issues that people face elsewhere. The issues women face here are issues that women face elsewhere. It's just sort of a reality of the world and how our cultures, despite being separate cultures, can influence each other in good context or bad.
And also, I completely understand the idea that we are lacking certain cultural concepts because, I'm Canadian. My experience with politics is based solely in the West, and in terms of the way I absorb my stories is through a Western lens. But there are an awful lot of fridged women in Yakuza, like to an absurd degree. That's the entirety of Yakuza 6. It's one of my favorite characters in the entire series gets fridged for the vast majority of the game as just pure motivation for the main character. And it's such a waste. And it's not great storytelling. I'm sorry, fridging isn't good storytelling. There are better ways to give your character motivation than that. The writers are better than that.
Yeah. Every like the writers are better than that, and I feel like everyone agrees, right? Like if you did you mention which game it was in?
A 6, yeah.
Yeah, so like if anyone's out there who's played 6, you know who we're talking about. It is such a waste because it is such a that character is such a fan favorite, and I don't think there's a single person who prefers it the way it turned out.
No, it's such a shame. And to be again, it's not just fridging her; it's also putting her in a. You know what? Let's not talk about 6 in terms of that. That isn't what the podcast is, because I have some significant issues with 6, especially following 5.
I feel like it's still
5.
Yeah. I feel like it's important to just mention it though, because it is important for people to be aware of, like, hey, this is in there. You should probably be aware of it. We love this series to death, but be ready for some of this.
If you love something, be ready to confront the problems with it.
Yeah.
You need to. You cannot just close your eyes and pretend that they don't exist, or simply dismiss them because, well, it was made in Japan. Like, there are significant narrative issues with the Yakuza series based on the treatment of some of the characters. There just are. And for the record, those characters are usually women. And thankfully, it seems like that has been improving in recent years after 6. Let's move on to what I would argue is the next best entry point for the series, which is the somewhat recent Yakuza Like a Dragon, which is Yakuza 7. This is a complete reboot of the series in terms of the way the game is played. Unlike the others, which are beat-em-ups, this is a turn-based RPG. It stars a brand new character who finds himself in a very similar position as Kiryu did in the original Yakuza. But it uses that familiar framework to tell a very different story with a very different kind of man. And if you are looking for a great entry point into the Yakuza series, and if you're listening to this podcast, you probably like turn-based RPGs, Yakuza Like a Dragon is simply one of the best games that's been released for the last 5 years, in my opinion.
It is everything you would want to love about Like a Dragon / Yakuza. It is a turn-based RPG, and the protagonist loves Dragon Quest. He loves Dragon Quest. So he is basically every person who has ever listened to this podcast.
He is. The game is exceptional. It has everything that makes Yakuza great. It has the bizarre sub-stories. It has the incredible weird cast of characters. It has the melodramatic plots. It has a very a strong female main character, which is really nice when you're coming from the rest of the series.
I believe that is it is the directorial debut of Ryosuke Hori,
which could be a sign of where things are going.
You know what else is a sign? The main character likes Dragon Quest. The director's name is Hori. same name of the director for Dragon Quest. I'm just saying, I feel like the stars aligned to give GC exactly what he wanted.
It's so good. It's good.
It's such a serendipitous crossover.
And it is a very strong crossover in many ways. Like, it's interesting that in early games in the series, Dragon Quest is such a staple in Japanese culture. And in Yakuza 0, I believe, there's a side quest where you need to look for a copy of, what was it, Arcane Quest? Yeah, you're looking for a copy of Dragon Quest, but it's not called Dragon Quest. It's called something else. But in this game, they don't just name check Dragon Quest. The entire game is an homage, right down, like the combat, the style, much of the. It's really kind of amazing that they did this, considering that Dragon Quest is obviously not owned by Sega.
If I remember right, they got the blessing of Yuji Horii to do it.
Yeah, it's a terrific game. It's so good. And if we're talking about politics, I would argue that Kiryu is. Okay, we're getting into politics here. I'm just gonna say this. It's interesting because when I think about media that I absorb and media that I really, really like, there are very few characters who I would argue are conservatives. Right. Like, maybe that's a failing on my part, but I think there are very few main characters who I think are actual, like, conservatives.
Like outwardly, explicitly.
Yeah, maybe small c conservatives, but like a conservative. I would argue that Kiryu is a conservative man.
Yeah.
He is very conservative.
He's incredibly old-fashioned, he's behind the times. He's always been behind the times.
And I'm not even talking conservatives in terms of politics or Republicans or conservative Tories in my country.
No, just like the conservative style of a person who's incredibly old-fashioned and very slow on the uptake.
We were talking about I mentioned abortion with Yakuza 6. Like, in my mind, I have no problem with believing that Kiryu is pro-life.
Easy.
Like, that, to me, that's just like, yeah, that makes complete sense. That's very much in his character.
Yeah.
Ichiban in Like a Dragon, I would argue, is probably a small L liberal. Like, just the way
makes a lot of sense.
And it also fits with the politics of Like a Dragon, because the whole plot of Like a Dragon is featuring, there's a political movement called, is it Bleach Japan?
Yeah, I think it's that. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's anti-sex worker, it's anti-immigrant, it's a populist movement kind of idea that we've seen pop up all around the world. And Ichiban is, shall we say, somewhat opposed.
So, like, it kind of makes sense that he's a small L liberal, mostly because first of all, his appearance is very his appearance is very, very, like, the way that Ichiban dresses, the way that he presents himself is very trendy.
Trendy for his era.
Yeah, but he's very much like, he comes across as the person who when he was younger, he was very like cutting edge, and now that he's older, he's trying to still be cutting edge, but he can't keep up anyway.
Yeah.
like it's that sort of thing, as opposed to Kiryu's more like, he can't keep up, but he's just fine.
Kiryu is timeless.
Yeah, like he's more of like a classic guy, whereas
He is always going to wear that suit.
Mm-hmm. Whereas like Ichiban, you can kind of see him wear pretty much anything, and
in fact you do, because there's a job system in the
exactly.
game.
That's what I was gonna say. It's like which you do, because he's constantly changing clothes.
Yeah, that's another thing in this game. There is a phenomenal job system.
I have heard so many good things, and so many I've heard, to be honest, I've heard and this is your wheelhouse now.
Mm-hmm.
I've heard good and bad things about the combat system in Like a Dragon. I've heard people tell me that it's amazing. I've heard people tell me that it's nothing special. I've heard people tell me that it's a lot of fun, and then I've heard people tell me that it's very basic.
I could agree with every single thing you just said, depending on where I'm coming from.
Incredible.
It is a pretty standard turn-based combat system that is obviously very inspired by Dragon Quest, because that's the point. Mm-hmm. However, attacks have so much style to them. I mean, they literally mapped heat moves onto magic. So, like, when you use a magic spell, you're essentially doing a heat move from the original Yakuza games. There are like the really big over-the-top summons in this game, which is where a lot of references from past games come in. It's done with so much style that there was no point in the game where I found myself particularly bored by it. However, I do appreciate the fact that there are going to be points where the game does get a little bit repetitive in terms of the combat system, because it's the same as any other Yakuza game, where it's, you're roaming around town, you see an enemy, they see you, they run up to you, you find yourself in a fight. But whereas turn-based combat is much more methodical and slow,
it's a thinking game.
It's a much more thinking game. But the problem is with turn-based with the random, quote unquote, random encounters from the rest of the Yakuza series. Like, yeah, a guy will walk up to you and you can just tiger drop him repeatedly, and that's the end of that combat encounter. Whereas you need to actually play through each random encounter turn-based, selecting your thing. It's a turn-based RPG. And if you're coming at it from the Yakuza mindset, where it's very, very fast, yeah, it can be a little bit slow. That being said, once you make that adjustment, I don't think it's a problem at all. I think it's a great system. It's a really good game. It's an exceptionally good game. So I highly recommend, if anyone is looking for a entry point into the Yakuza series and they are a much more traditional JRPG fan, Like a Dragon is just a no-brainer. Just get it. You'll love it.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't even played it yet, but at this point,
you're gonna love it.
People come up to me and they're like, "Oh, it's incredible. You're like, it's so good. It's so much fun." And at this point, I'm inclined to believe them.
GC, you're gonna love it. You're just like, I would be very surprised if you walked away from this game saying, it's not, it wasn't quite for me. It's Yakuza. It is
I've
a
played
Yakuza
1,000
game.
hours of Dragon Quest. I've played almost 1,000 hours of Yakuza.
Oh.
I 100% believe you.
There's a point in the game at about, I would argue maybe 4 hours in, you are going to drop your controller laughing uncontrollably.
I'm so excited.
Just at references and other things like sound effects. And the game it's not just, okay, this isn't a spoiler, because it's done in like the first few seconds of the game. Do you mind if I just...
Yeah, go for it.
In the first few minutes of the game, there's an actual in-story reason why it's turn-based, which is there's a fight, and one of Ichiban's, I guess, underlings, or like, anyway, he says, like, what's up with you when you fight? And he's like, oh, I just love Dragon Quest so much that when I fight, I imagine that I'm playing a Dragon Quest game. And this continues into the game where, like, your enemies on the street, the usual thugs, will mutate into very Dragon Quest-esque characters because Ichiban, that's how he views the world. Which is really, really funny. And the joke is that there's a possibility that Ichiban has brain damage. And that's why he is continuously seeing the world.
He has head trauma.
Yeah. It's an exceptional game. I think you're really going to love it on both a Yakuza and a Dragon Quest level.
Yeah.
And if anyone out there is, looking for a good entry point, that's a very good one.
Just be aware
yeah,
that the rest of the series plays nothing like it.
The combat plays nothing like it. Everything else in it plays exactly like it. It's a Yakuza game, right down to the Sega arcades and the sub-stories. Everything else is Yakuza. It's just the turn-based combat that's different. Like there's a sub-quest that involves a monkey getting his hands on a wrecking ball. Like this is not this is not outside of the realm of Yakuza.
It's also worth noting that this is the Yakuza game that is directed by one of the creative developers who worked on the side quests and mini game section of the series since like Yakuza 2. So for this game to have like this game is probably also going to have a lot of really good versions of those things as well, because he's directing the entire game and he has a lot of say over what goes in and out.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, he's probably his story is incredible. I was doing research on it because I just finished the video on Kiwami 2 about Ryosuke Hori, because he did the I guess we didn't really talk about Kiwami 2, but Kiwami 2 has like an entire extra campaign in it.
Oh yeah.
That Ryosuke Hori directed when he came back from intestinal cancer. He survived intestinal cancer and he came back to the development of the project with nothing to do, and he wanted to go back to work, because I mean that's sort of like par for the course with cancer survivors. It's like once they survive it, it's like, dude, I want to, whatever it is that I wasn't able to do, I want to get back into it.
Mm-hmm.
So they gave him that extra campaign. Nails it. I mean, completely nails it. And that's what gets him the job as director for Like a Dragon. And I mean the results speak for themselves. It is just a work of love to the things that he enjoys, and it's such an uplifting like little sort of like story within this dude's life and the series itself. So I'm really excited to play 7, because I want to see that. I want to see that sort of like celebration of his sort of like victory.
Well, you are going to be delighted by a great deal in it, I believe. Now we have a little bit of time left, so let's talk a little bit about, there are, I would argue, 2 other entry points if you want to get into the Yakuza series.
Okay.
One of which is not yet released. We got some big news, big news a few weeks ago.
Big news.
Which is, there are a lot of spin-offs that are Japanese only, including a bunch of them. Yeah, they're all listed in the feature, but there are 2 of them that are samurai spin-offs, which it's a really interesting concept. It uses the Yakuza cast of characters as almost the cast of historical dramas. So it like casts, think like Muppets Christmas Carol, but instead of the Muppets, it's Kiryu and the gang doing samurai games.
I've never heard anyone make that comparison, but that's so true. It's like a Muppets. It's a Muppets Sengoku era. Like,
yep.
It's so funny. I've never thought of it that way.
Yeah, so like these are the characters that you know and love, but they're put into very different situations. And in this particular case, Like a Dragon Ishin was released back in 2014. It was almost like a prototype of sorts for Yakuza 0, like using multiple combat styles and the graphic engine and stuff. And it's getting a full ground-up remake. It's coming out next year worldwide on February 21st, 2023. And because it is a samurai game set in Shogunate era Japan, it has nothing to do with any of the other games. So it is a perfect entry point if you want to experience the type of gameplay that the Yakuza games have to offer, with the caveat that we have not played this game yet because it is not released. But it does look like a pretty good entry point.
I know people who played the original Ishin, and they tell me that the original Ishin, the sword combat in those Yakuza spin-offs is incredible. To the point where people who have played Kenzan and Ishin wish that they would find a way to put that in Yakuza proper. Which is something that's very defining of this series, is that the spin-offs are all very good sidesteps that you can go and check out, even if you have no context for the series. I would say, like, I would actually say like any spin-off that doesn't have to do with like existing characters, like in the main line, like in their original sort of interpretation, is a great little like dip your toes in the water sort of thing.
Well, it's funny. I was talking with Solosi about this a few weeks ago on this podcast, actually, about how I think that this idea of casting like the cast of Yakuza in these things, I think that they could go further with it. Like they did it a little bit with Dead Souls, where it's like, hey, what if the cast of Yakuza was in a zombie movie?
Yeah.
But like, I think they could do it with like set one in the far, far future in space on spaceships. Using these characters, like you could use them to explore different genres within the Yakuza framework. It would be really interesting.
By any chance, did I when you were talking about that, did either of you daydream about a Yakuza game in the style of Star Trek, where they were the crew?
No, but I love the
starship
idea. Actually,
can you imagine? They're all officers.
Okay, I'm kind of I know where you're coming from, but I'm kind of feeling the Yakuza Star Wars.
Oh yeah,
a little bit like.
Oh yeah,
like I'm kind of feeling like Kiryu being stuck in this desert planet, and
he's got to find Komaki, and Komaki's a puppet.
Yeah, like I feel like space opera would be good, although perfect. Star Trek would be good too.
It would be diplomacy, but with your fists. It would be fist diplomacy.
Frankly, I would love to see Kirk Fu be worked into the Yakuza series as one of the combat styles.
Oh yeah, like that double, like I'm gonna put both of my hands together in a very inefficient fist, and I'm gonna hit you center of your back, and that's gonna knock you out, because I guess Starfleet knows super advanced martial arts in the future.
The second you switch over to Kirk Fu, your shirt gets ripped open.
Well, I mean, that's just par for the course in this game.
Very, very true. So, like I said, we can't really talk about Ishin a lot yet because it's not released in the West. Neither one of us have played it, but it looks really, really good. It's coming out in a few months. Super, super excited for it.
It looks incredible. The marketing material that they've done for it, like that poster, like that cover image is of Kiryu just like with the gun like up to his forehead. Is very, very nice. Very, very like it's a beautiful framing. But yeah, I agree. They should like go to the Wild West. They should like,
oh, that'd be great.
Yeah, they should do cowboys. They should do cowboys versus aliens with the Yakuza characters.
Okay, I'm just gonna pitch this because I was talking about Muppets a second ago. What about a Yakuza Christmas Carol?
I would do it. I would play that game in a heartbeat. I would help make that game. I would do anything. I would do anything. Like who would be the ghost and who would be the Scrooge? Would Akiyama be the Scrooge? No, Akiyama would be the ghost.
Akiyama would be the ghost who was the partner. He'd be Marley.
Yeah.
Although Akiyama as Scrooge is a good idea though, because he has to learn the value of the real value of money and what money can do.
It'd be like a weird like inversion of the Scrooge character.
Anyway, okay. So last entry point that we'll talk about for the Yakuza series, and this one is, if you don't want to play Yakuza proper, you have a real good entry point in that there is a spin-off series called Judgment, which is kind of like a crossover of Yakuza and the Ace Attorney series. So it takes place in Kamurocho, same time period. It's modern day Japan. It involves organized crime, but instead of it being you're a member of the Yakuza or a former member of the Yakuza, you are slightly on the outside, and you are a much younger, hipper character who is a former defense attorney and a current private detective.
My favorite character.
There are 2 games thus far in the series. There's Judgment and Lost Judgment, and they are terrific. Um, they're still Yakuza games. Like, if you know what a Yakuza game is, these are them. Like, you can go to the batting cages. You could, like, there are many, there's no karaoke, but
What?
it's terrific. They're both great.
What do you mean there's no karaoke?
There's no karaoke in either game.
There's no karaoke?
No.
Oh, that guy can't sing?
I don't know. I think they should move it. I think they should. Karaoke is if you love karaoke, you should play the Yakuza series.
It's a staple.
It's a staple. It moves a bit away from the Yakuza classic framework. However, you are going to be getting a game that is very much in line with Yakuza, right down to like sub stories, all of the side content, everything there, over the top melodrama. There are some elements of like the Ace Attorney series, including like questioning people, investigating certain areas, but it recontextualizes a lot of what we know of the Yakuza series and Kamurocho. That's one of the coolest things about coming back. Like, Kamurocho is a character in and of itself, and we come back to it in almost every single game. But when you re-enter Kamurocho through the eyes of a different character, it's a very different city. Like, no one sees their own town quite in the same way as everyone else.
Kamurocho is a reflection of whoever is walking amongst it.
Mm-hmm. And these games are really, really good entry points for people who want to get that Yakuza experience but don't want the baggage. Because unlike Yakuza Like a Dragon has a lot of references to other Yakuza games, this doesn't have. This has like occasional ones, but for the most part, it's completely standalone.
From what I understand, it is a very conscious decision to basically say, hey, we can make a game centered around other people. I think Judgment is sort of like a proof positive that they can work with other characters, and also that they can tell different stories that aren't necessarily centered around a character in the Yakuza. Where it's like you can, like, I was gonna say Private Eyes are my favorite kinds of characters because they walk that very nice, delicate line in narratives and media. In real life, private investigators don't actually do a lot of the stuff that
they're usually just looking for, divorce cases.
Yeah, it's like someone owes somebody else alimony, but like
everyone gets into the business wanting to find the Maltese Falcon, and they find themselves on stakeouts with cameras taking photos of spouses.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, oh, he's cheating on you, dang, and it's the 1000th case that week. But the Private Eye is such a cool character because it walks that it's that perfect line of in media where you can sort of tell the stories about, because one of the things about Yakuza that people should probably really appreciate more is that they kind of tell the story of people who are in lives of crime that may not necessarily, that probably wasn't their first choice. And it sort of captures the humanity of those people. It's very much like, I'm not comparing it to this. I'm not saying it's as good as this, but it's in the same vein as like The Godfather or, stories like that, where it tries to capture the human being behind that sort of like life and sort of capture that very complicated like duality of like, this is a family man who is also part of a criminal underground ring that's involved in horrible things. With Private Eye stories, you kind of still get that, but Private Eyes have to sort of like watch that from the outside, and you have to like they sort of have to like, it's kind of like the way I put it is you are not the bad guy, but you are still close enough to the bad guy that you grow to care about the bad guy in a weird sense. Where it's like you kind of like respect that sort of person if it's a story about that. Well,
that's noir. That's the idea.
Yes,
is
exactly.
There's a lot of darkness that we don't see, and Judgment, the first Judgment especially, goes into that quite a bit. And the second, there's still a lot of Yakuza in the first Judgment. And by Yakuza, I don't mean like the style of the game. I mean like literally, there's a lot of guys in really garish shirts roaming around in Judgment. Way less so in Lost Judgment. Really cool thing that happened. I really, really love when different people come to a game with a different perspective. Like Caitlin reviewed, I haven't written a review for this one. I think it's one of the only Yakuza games I've never written a review for. Caitlin loved Lost Judgment. She really did. She gave it a 93, and I really enjoyed it too.
Ooh.
And rather, the main story of Lost Judgment, instead of it being Yakuza, it takes place in a high school, and it actually involves exploration of bullying in this high school, and it's a really interesting take on it. And Caitlin loved it, and Zach recently reviewed it, and Zach did not like it even close to as much. Didn't hate it, but Zach's actually a school teacher, and it was really interesting getting that his take on the story of like bullying in high school and things like that. So yeah, if you're looking for games that are coming at the Yakuza formula with a slightly different agenda, to want to tell slightly different stories, both Judgment and Lost Judgment are excellent places to start. And I mean, there's going to be a lot of Yakuza, or Like a Dragon as it's recently been rebranded, coming out in the future. We have Yakuza, we have Like a Dragon Ishin, which is coming out in February. We have Like a Dragon Gaiden, The Man Who Erased His Name, which is going to be like a midquel, featuring Kiryu after 6.
I like that term.
Yeah, and then we're going to have Like a Dragon 8, which appears to be joining Kiryu and Ichiban together.
He's a deuteragonist now.
Which I don't understand how it's going to work. I don't get it. I know that you need to play 7 to quite get what I mean by this, but like I said, Ichiban views the world through Dragon Quest, and that's why there is turn-based combat. Kiryu does not do that, clearly. Kiryu views the world through, there's a person in the way of my fist. And it's going to be interesting to see how they combine those two worldviews into one game. I think they might actually do a Yakuza 0 type thing where Kiryu has one path and Ichiban has another. And there might be some crossover, but they're going to be telling parallel stories. But that's just
similar to Yakuza 0.
That's just a theory. Well, anyway, it doesn't matter. There's going to be a lot of Yakuza coming out, or Like a Dragon coming out in the future. Chances are that there's always going to be Mahjong involved.
Oh, yes, please. More.
Yes.
More. Go learn how to play Mahjong. I need more people to play Mahjong with.
You're going to love this then. When I was, we've got to wrap the episode up because I think we're running a little long. When I was visiting my mom and dad in Nova Scotia last month, and my mother has started playing Mahjong with some of her friends. I don't know how this happened, but they will get together every like Tuesday and they'll play Mahjong together. But during the month I was there, there was some COVID exposures and they had to cancel them. So I was like, she really wanted to play Mahjong. And I was like, And I gave my parents my old PlayStation 4 to work as a media box. But I realized, so I downloaded Yakuza 6 on it and marched my mom into the Yakuza, into the Mahjong parlor, and she played Mahjong in Yakuza for like a good hour and a half and had a great time.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Had a grand old time.
That makes me so happy.
Yep. I still have no idea how to play, but that's okay.
Well, she'll teach you.
She tried. I think that I think me playing Mahjong is about as likely as my mother actually playing through all of the Yakuza series, but it's there if you want it, and that's the beauty of the Yakuza series and the Like a Dragon series. There is, if you want it, there is so much there. There is a golf mini game. There's a baseball mini game. You can go on dates with people. You can go and sing karaoke and play a really great rhythm mini game. You can go dance at the disco. There's so much that you can do in these games. So many different styles of gameplay, and I think that's why it's one of my all-time favorite series.
Yeah, I mean, it's the series is just it's full of like really, really novel things. It's always striving to be very different while still maintaining this weird nostalgic sort of feeling from an era that you may never have even been a part of. And it just tells these stories that are heartfelt and full of just sort of like raw emotion and at its heart, just like just wanting to care about people. And it's just got this, it's always got this very almost always has this very heartwarming takeaway of just caring about the people close to you, and doing anything for them.
These are not, how can I put this? I mean this in a very good way. These are not subtle games. These
No.
are games that wear their heart on their sleeves for the better and for the worse. Like you heard that GC and I, we have some significant problems with Yakuza 6, A Song of Life, but I would argue that it's still, I don't know, from my perspective, Yakuza 6, I have significant problems with it, but it's not subtle. It's still wearing its heart in its sleeve. It's just going in a very different direction than I think that it should have. And I think it celebrates many of the qualities of Yakuza that I least like.
Yeah.
Whereas Yakuza 7, Like a Dragon, features many of celebrates the qualities that I do like. So that's just the kind of series it is. When you have, 23 entries, not all of them might be quite for you.
Yeah, it's I wouldn't call it a mixed bag, but I would definitely say there's some bad apples in the bunch.
Yeah, it's like when you get a basket of like peaches and they all look good on the top, and you get one, you're like, oh, that has a bad spot on it. Well, maybe I can just cut the bad spot off.
Yeah. It's kind of a matter of, please enjoy this for the reasons that, make it enjoyable, and just be aware that there's some bits of it that you probably want to eat around.
And there you go with the food analogy.
I can't stop doing it. every time I write, every time I make anything for RPG Fan, it comes back to food.
There are worse frames to write with.
That's true. I should eat something next time, though.
Well, for everyone out there listening, thank you for listening to us ramble about Yakuza for the last hour plus. This is something that we could easily go on for another hour plus
Forever.
Talking about easily. But I think we'll leave it right there. GC, thank you so much for spending your evening talking with me. And thank you so much for doing this feature with me.
Of course. Likewise. I mean, thank you so much for letting me be on it. And thank you for encouraging my enthusiasm. Just it was an honor, to be honest. You've been a pleasure to talk to, and I'm super happy to have gotten to know you.
GC this is not me minimizing my contribution, because I did do a lot of work on this feature. However, the frame of this feature, the point of view, where it's coming from, the structure, that's GC, and the work you put into this is quite remarkable. And you put a lot more work into it than we actually see on the page. I believe you are thinking about spinning off some stuff that we cut into other features.
Yeah. I think I might. Just because it's worth putting out there. I think
there's so much to talk about.
Yeah, there is. There really truly is.
And I think that's the mark of not necessarily of a good game series, but a game series that is worthy of being celebrated. If you're willing
and discussing,
and if it generates this much discussion and passion and excitement and controversy, there's really something there.
Absolutely.
Well, speaking of something being there, we have a store. There's a store there now. Wow, that was an awkward transition, but it's there. So yeah, we have a store, rpgfan.com/shop. So if you are looking to buy some merch and support RPG Fan, it's a great way to do so. You can get mugs, you can get magnets, you can get all kinds of things, some t-shirts. So check that out. If you want to support us here at Random Encounter, you can do so by checking out some of our past episodes. We have an awful lot of them. In many of them, we talk about Yakuza. So check that out. We are not the only podcast here at RPG Fan, though. We also have Retro Encounter. If you are a fan of me and my voice, boy, are you in for a retro treat, because October was Adventure Game Month at Retro Encounter, and I was on 3 episodes in a row: Monkey Island, The Wolf Among Us, and Broken Age. They were an absolute joy to play through all 3 games. I love adventure games. They're some of my favorite genres. So yeah, check those out. Oh, and if you are still a fan of me, even after listening to those 3 episodes, boy, are you in for a treat, because I'm on 3 more episodes of Retro Encounter in November, talking about all the games in the Mass Effect series, which was awesome, because I'd never played Mass Effect before. And I binged all 3 games. And then because I'm a glutton, I played Andromeda. And really, really enjoyed it. So Solosi is going to be leading us through those games next month. and you should definitely check those out. We also have Rhythm Encounter, which I mentioned a little bit earlier. That is our music podcast. Last week was focusing on the music of Masafumi Takada, and next week will be a spooky Halloween episode focusing on the music of the Castlevania series. If you'd like to get in contact with us here at Random Encounter, you can fire us off a message at podcast@rpgfan.com. I'd love to hear from you, whatever you have. If you have any ideas for future episodes, if you disagree with anything that we said about the Yakuza Like a Dragon series, I would love to hear it. If you'd like to send me an email, you can do so at jlogan@rpgfan.com. You can also find me on Twitter at Jono_Logan. Feel free to add me if you'd like. GC, why don't you tell us some of the many, many ways that folks can find you online?
Oh, man. Okay. You can, well, first of all, you can find more of my features at rpgfan.com. I am trying to write more features. I've got a couple in the works right now that I got to work on. You can find me on YouTube at youtube.com/GC Vazquez. I have been working on a very long set of video projects that are going to be coming out pretty soon here. Been basically working on it for an entire year. It's been a huge production thing for me. You can find me on twitch.tv/GC Vazquez. And if you want to yell at me about Yakuza or have a conversation with me about Yakuza, you can find me at Twitter at GC_Vazquez.
Cool. If you enjoyed this podcast, please share it with your friends. You can help us get the word out there. You can rate us on iTunes or your other podcast player of choice. GC, again, thank you so much for joining me this evening. I really, really appreciate it.
Hey, thanks for having me.
It was an absolute pleasure. Absolute pleasure, sir.
Likewise.
And to all of you out there, thank you for joining us this evening. And whatever you're playing, have fun.